morning. I'm Aaron Powers, working with the Llewellyn, McEnroe, and Moriarty families. Thank you for your time today and for your interest in the evolving story of what happened to their sons in Al Jaffer, Jordan. Families appreciate, as we begin, they want to express their appreciation for the Army and for the FBI for their support and work to date, and for briefing them recently on the findings of their FBI investigation. As we begin, we also want to recognize some distinguished guests here today. Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard of Hawaii, Congressman Ted Poe of Texas, and Congressman Emanuel Cleaver of Missouri. Senator Roy Blunt of Missouri could not be with us here today after all. We also wish to recognize a few others who have kindly given their time and talent in support of the families ahead of this news conference. Lynn Gardner-Hinkle in Kansas City, Carmel Hinkle and Pauline Jacquet here in Washington, and Stacy Manella in Houston. Everybody appreciates all of their hard work. After the family's remarks, Congressman Poe will speak, and then Congresswoman Gabbard will discuss the bipartisan House Resolution 608, the Stop Arming Terrorists Act. From there, we'll go to Q&A. If you need anything else during the news conference, just please let us know over there. And again, thank you for being here today. And with that, please welcome Brian McEnroe.
Thanks, Aaron, and distinguished guests, everyone who's here today. Thank you very much for being here. On the 3rd of November, 2016, I exchanged text messages with my son. I did that often when he was deployed. Staff Sergeant Kevin J. McEnroe. It was the usual exchange between us. Hey buddy, how you doing? How's it going? And his response was pretty uniform. Hey Pops, I'm okay, just been really busy. Tell Mom and the boys that I'm okay, and I'll reach out right before Thanksgiving. I'll try to give everyone a call. So my reply was, okay buddy, talk to you soon, love you. And his response, as usual, was, love you too, Pops. On the 4th of November, I got in my car to run an errand, and about a block away from my home, I turned on the radio, and the very first words that came out of the speaker was, 3 American trainers were killed in Jordan at an air base today. And I can't tell you how, but it just hit me like a sledgehammer, and I knew that I was never going to see my son again. I spent most of the rest of that day, trying to find some details. I called his roommate in Nashville, couldn't reach him. Emails, internet, what you would expect. Just hoping and praying that I was wrong, and I'd find out that he was okay. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case, and it was released, no names of the soldiers that were killed, but they did release a report that the Jordanians had said that the American soldiers failed to stop at the gate, and that caused them to shoot, and they categorized it as an unfortunate misunderstanding, a tragic misunderstanding, clearly laying the blame on the American soldiers. Later that night, I received notification that parents, siblings, and loved ones of all the people who serve in our armed forces dread when Kevin's brothers called me from Nashville to tell me that Kevin had been killed. And at that point, I guess like all the other members of all the other Gold Star families in our country, I knew that my life was never going to be the same. I continued to follow the story, hoping that there would be some kind of explanation as to what happened that day. And subsequently, the Jordanians released another narrative that one of the Americans had accidentally discharged the weapon inside their vehicle, which caused the unfortunate incident. Department of Defense and FBI forensic investigations have not found any evidence to support that assertion, so I call that lie number 2. Last week, our families were briefed by FBI and Department of Defense as to a description of how the events unfolded, and that was followed by our ability to view a very comprehensive video of the shooting. The shooter, who was interviewed by FBI agents, testified that he heard a loud noise as the Americans approached the gate, and thinking that he was under attack, he panicked and opened fire. I can tell you with absolute certainty that anyone who views this video will only conclude that this third false narrative is equally as insulting as the first two. Over 4 months have passed since our boys were murdered. None of our families has heard any apology, condolences, or explanation from the Jordanians other than these false narratives, insulting false narratives. And in my mind, Jordan is at the very least guilty of complicity in the murder of 3 American brave servicemen. I guess based on their behavior, the Jordanians believe that our sons were expendable. And I can promise you that they weren't expendable to us or our families. I'd like to take a minute to acknowledge and thank the Army and the FBI for the support they've provided my family through this horrible ordeal. And I would especially like to thank everyone from the 5th Special Forces Group in Fort Campbell, Kentucky, because I don't know how my family or I would have made it through this without their support. You know, we're told that Jordan is an important ally in the war on terror, a war which I support. But I encourage our president and our administration to take a hard look at our relationship with an ally who would so callously disrespect the sacrifice made by our boys. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Chuck Llewellyn, the father of Sergeant First Class Matthew Charles Llewellyn. Matt was 27 years old and he'd been in the Army since 2010. He was a son, brother, cousin, grandson, and a future husband, and would have made a great father. I'm here for a couple reasons. First, I'm here to clear up the report that they did anything wrong, as reported by the Jordanian press. Second, I'm here to tell you they were clearly murdered. I think it is important for these young men to have their names cleared of any wrongdoing. There were 2 different reports the Jordanian press released, and both of them accused our men of doing something wrong. Let me be clear, the men followed procedure for entering the checkpoint. They did not charge the gate, nor was there any accidental discharge of a weapon. They approached the gate and the Jordanian soldiers did exactly as they were supposed to do. They moved the spike strips from the road, they raised the gate allowing the trucks to come through, they then slid the gate to the side allowing the next vehicles to continue on through. Vehicle number 1 went through the gate with no problems. Vehicle number 2 being driven by Staff Sergeant McEnroe, and my son, Sergeant First Class Llewellyn, was going through with no problem. So again, let me be clear, our men were following proper procedure. Point number 2 is how I believe our men were murdered. I have watched the video showing their murders. Here's what happens next. There is a guard shack they must go by. The guard shack is a concrete hut with a sliding window that they must pass. The guard shack is also covered with a camo netting, making visibility to see inside the shack very difficult. As they pulled even with the sliding window, they were ambushed from mere feet away by a Jordanian officer who was inside the guard shack with an M16 with accurate and lethal precision. There was no warning for my son, or Staff Sergeant McEnroe. They were simply murdered by an ally officer of the Jordanian Army. I will also tell you the Jordanian officer then leaves the safety of his concrete guard shack to continue pursuing Staff Sergeant Moriarty, and a fellow Green Beret. I am crystal clear that these were murders, and this Jordanian officer should be charged with 3 murders. Let me finish with this. I would also like to thank the Army and the FBI for everything they have done to help my family during the last few months. I couldn't be more proud of my son's life. He's a man that loved what he done and loved wearing the Green Beret. We'll miss his smile and bright future that was taken away from us. The ambush and murder of my son Matt and his brothers in arms, Jimmy and Kevin, has linked these 3 families forever. We are Gold Star families now. That's why we stand in solidarity with each other as we seek to correct the record. No other families should have to endure this kind of grief. We want the King of Jordan, who is also a father, to acknowledge our sacrifice and assure the safety of American troops in Jordan. We want the service and sacrifice of these 3 heroes, Kevin, Jimmy, and Matt, these 3 superheroes, to be acknowledged and remembered. If anything good can come from their deaths, let it be the ultimate protection of their friends and fellow soldiers who choose to fight and protect our American values and our freedom. Greater love hath no man than this, that a man will lay down his life for his friends.
Thank you. Thank you for being here today. Thank you for helping us speak the truth to what happened to our boys. Before I begin my remarks, let me say how much my family and I respect the Llewellyns and McEnroe family. We may live in different geographical and political places, but our families were brought together by this terrible incident. We all share an intense love for our sons, and we miss them beyond words. Our families agree that honoring our sons' service and lives must include finding the truth about what happened to them that day in Jeffrey, Jordan. My son was doing exactly what he wanted to do. He was serving with the people he wanted to serve with, and he was serving his country exactly the way he wanted to do. He was living his dream. Because of the work of the United States government, we now know what happened to our sons. Like the Llewellyns and McEnroes, my family very much appreciates what the Army and the FBI have done to help us understand what happened. What we do not know is why it happened or when Jordan will be held accountable. And we do not know why Jordan continues to lie about what happened even to this moment. Because of his surveillance video, we know that Kevin and Matt's survival chances were almost 0. Caught completely by surprise by the Jordanian soldier, Maharik Abdullah, they died mercifully, quickly, in hail of gunfire. My son, Staff Sergeant James Moriarty, would not be so lucky. The surveillance video, now in the possession of the FBI, shows the McEnroe truck cautiously pulling up to the slide gate. And we've got graphics to show you the slide gate. Just like any other day. This was the base on which our sons lived. My son used this gate almost every day. My son had lived on this base for 7 months. Abu Tayeb, body encased in body armor and just out of view of the surveillance camera, opens fire with an M16 assault rifle on Kevin and Matt. He is closer than you and I. He could have put a bayonet on the end of his gun and he could have stabbed them. He's in a concrete building hidden behind a camouflage shade. Bullet holes appear in view of the camera. Shattered glass flies. My son Jimmy and a fellow Special Forces soldier I'll call Mike exited their truck just in time to avoid being killed in cold blood. Then spend the remaining 6.5 minutes of my son's life communicating with Abu Tayeb, both in English and cursing, and in Arabic. And my son and the survivor held their hands up and communicated that they were not a threat. They tried to signal to the Jordanians, who were 5 Jordanian soldiers who were no more than 200 yards down the road. My son is seen in the video signaling like that, And that's how I watched my son die. Jimmy calls out in Arabic, "We are Americans. We are friends." Abu Taya makes the last assault on Jimmy and Mike. Mike's caught by surprise, and Jimmy stands up in full view of the shooter, and he engages him at a distance from view to eye. My son takes a couple of assault rifle rounds in the chest. Mike, using that opportunity, is seen circling around the Jersey barrier, and finally he empties his gun in the side of the Jordanian soldier, where he's able to put rounds that aren't protected by the body armor. The government of Jordan began its lies to the world while my son's body was still warm. They have continued those lies to this moment. And they tell lies which are conclusively shown by the video to be lies. The video does not have audio, but in the video you can see the conduct of some of these soldiers. And there's no way there were shots fired. There was no way there was loud noise that would have caused anyone any concern. And he's literally closer than you and I when he murders McEnroe and Llewellyn. And he says he thinks he was under assault by the Americans who pass through that gate every day. And I say to you, even a dog knows the difference between being kicked and being stepped on. Our government gives Jordan, our taxpayers give Jordan, north of $1 billion a year in foreign aid. The American public is told that the government of Jordan is our ally. This incident raises some troubling questions about that relationship, especially when you consider that no Jordanian has accepted any responsibility for these murders for 4 months, nor has any Jordanian stated officially or otherwise what truly happened. As for the foreign aid for Jordan, I say no more. Enough is enough.
I'm Ted Poe, a member of Congress from Texas. I'm also chairman of the Terrorism Subcommittee in Foreign Affairs. I represent James Moriarty in Houston, Texas. I want to thank him, and Mr. McEnroe, and Mr. Llewellyn, these 3 dads that are here to see that justice is done for the loss of their sons who gave their lives. Just some quick comments about some things that maybe have not been mentioned. It's interesting to note that the first vehicle, American vehicle, was allowed through the second security gate. There's a gate at the bottom, and then there's a second gate that they went through. And then the attack started after the first American vehicle had already gone through. The second thing is, these 4 vehicles on this base had left earlier in the day, and now they are returning, and the same shift of Jordanians is there that lets them back in. Really didn't let them in at all, just the first vehicle. So it's the same Jordanians. These are not other Jordanians. As Mr. Moore already said, these men were stationed at this base, and they came and go, and people knew who they were, especially the Jordanians, who they were training. Part of their job was to train the Jordanians. The other thing I want to mention is that the shooter is apparently now in custody, I say that in quotes, in an induced medical coma by the Jordanians. Other than that, we do not know his status, his medical status, or what's going to happen to him by the Jordanian military. Induced medical coma. I wrote the Jordanian king after I talked to Jim Moriarty about his son, and have copies of the letters and the correspondence, and asked what happened, and that these men wanted to see the video of that they had in custody or in the possession of the Jordanians. I received a response from the Jordanian embassy. The response seemed to say that this entire incident was a mistake and the Americans were at fault for this whole incident. Last night I received a second comment from the Jordanian king or the embassy, and they now say that it was not a mistake, but the shooter was following the rules of engagement. And anyone in the military, and we have several people here, would say that the rules of engagement by the shooter certainly were not the result of appropriate rules of engagement. We wanted to find out what happened. I was a former judge. We want to have justice. We want to know exactly what happened, and the people responsible need to be held accountable. And the Jordanian government that works with the United States and has for years needs to come clean on the shooter and what the shooter did, his motives, rather than giving us different scenarios. And that is our goal, and we will find those answers. Working with the FBI and other agencies, we will get these answers, because these three dads and their families deserve to know exactly what occurred when their sons were killed entering the Jordanian base where they work. I also want to thank Ms. Gabbard from the Congress and Mr. Cleaver Congress for being here also, supporting the families. And I will turn the comments over to Ms. Gabbard, who has some comments.
Good morning, aloha. It's with a heavy heart that I stand here in support of and joining Mr. McEnroe, Mr. Llewellyn, Mr. Moriarty, as they speak for their families, as they speak for their sons who gave all to this country. My heart grieves with all of you as we honor their service and their bravery and their sacrifice. The pain that you feel and express is unimaginable. The loss of your son is a loss to our country. And it's a loss that's personally felt by so many of us who have or continue to wear the cloth of this country, brothers and sisters in arms. And we stand in solidarity with you in calling for answers and accountability. Your sons gave everything. They deserve more, and they deserve better. In December of last year, I introduced legislation called the Stop Arming Terrorists Act, and shortly after was contacted by Mr. Moriarty. We had not met or spoken before, but he expressed appreciation for the legislation and shared Jimmy's story about what actually happened that day in Jordan. It was deeply troubling to hear about not only what occurred, but the lack of accountability that we still see persisting today. The legislation that I introduced, the Stop Arming Terrorists Act, would end U.S. programs that have been going on for years, largely through the CIA, that have provided funding, weapons, and training to armed militant groups who are allied with and often working under the command of terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda, all in this effort to overthrow the Syrian government. The fact that American taxpayer dollars are being used to strengthen the very terrorist groups that we should be focused on defeating should alarm every American and every member of Congress. We call on the administration, Congress, and the American people to stand with these families, to stand with these brave heroes, to honor their lives, to honor their service, to pass this common sense legislation, and to demand accountability and answers. We should accept nothing less. Thank you.
My name is Emmanuel Cleaver. I represent Missouri's 5th District. I am here just as a friend of the families. And when I first was made aware of what happened in Jordan, the land of an ally, often spoken of it as our greatest ally, it was very, very disturbing. So I wanted to just be here in support. William Cullen Bryant said what all of us hope, that is, truth crushed to earth shall rise again. That's exactly what I think these families want. It's bad enough when you lose a loved one, but when you can't find out what happened, adds pain to pain.
If you ask questions, we have a mic that we can pass amongst you there by Mr. Llewellyn.
Is this working okay? How's it working okay?
Testing? Okay, now we're working. Yes, ma'am?
Has your briefing with the FBI given you guys any inclination that this was a coordinated or pre-planned attack?
No, to the contrary. You can watch the gate guard that I call the lift gate guy in the deal. He's clearly being casual, sauntering out to his post, not under any fear, not acting apprehensively. And I would say that the evidence that we've seen seems to pretty conclusively show that it was not a coordinated attack. Yes, sir?
Do we know anything about the shooter's background? Was he radicalized? Is that part of the investigation?
Good question. We are told by the FBI that they've examined his electronics, his public media, if he's got any, his cell phone, his computer, and they found no evidence of radicalization or outside influence. Yes, sir?
Do you know, so when the FBI investigation was completed?
Yes, generally. I think the FBI investigation was completed about mid-January, the end of January, but there was a difficulty in time where they wanted to brief all of the families about what happened, so that's why there's been a delay.
And you were briefed, again, on what date?
We were briefed, Tuesday last week, 28th of January, or 28th of February.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
You mentioned that there was a lot of communication with your son going on. Was there any indication leading up to this that there was any kind of problems with that maybe you can talk about, or any of you, if you could hear about anything in your emails?
My communication with my son was pretty limited to just some text messages. Every once in a while I would get a FaceTime, which my son was a communication sergeant, so he figured out how to make that work even though his phone was turned off. He told me he was being deployed, and he said it was just pretty easy stuff, and he'd be gone for a few months and he'd be back. He didn't tell me where he was going or what he was doing, just he was going to be deployed. I'll be leaving around the beginning October, and I'll be coming back in April. I believe it was April. He was due to get out in April.
Have any of you all been in touch with the White House on this? I mean, has there been a request? You saying it now, but
we all formed pictures in our minds of what happened, and because I knew that my son initially survived the initial attack, I was acutely interested in what happened, and I had in my mind this 30-second, 45-second fog of war gunfight. When I saw the video, I was beyond outraged, because it's 6.5 to 7 minutes from the time the first shots are fired until the murderer kills my son. So I asked the Army that question, and I said, I want to know how high in our government someone has seen this video, because I believe that if this video were shown by our highest leaders, they would be outraged. On Friday, I was informed that General James Mattis, the Secretary of Defense, had been personally shown the video that day. I do not believe that it's been seen at any higher level. Yes, ma'am?
Sir, Kim Dozier with the Daily Beast. You mentioned some audio. You mentioned that there were swear words exchanged back and forth, and they identified themselves as Americans.
Yes, ma'am.
Where did you hear that? Was that if the surveillance video had no audio, was something else recording that?
The survivor, who I'm calling Mike, and I have had extensive discussions and candid discussions. And you can see in the video, you can see my son and you can see Mike attempting to visually communicate. You can't hear any words spoken, but Mike has told me at some length about the words that were spoken. Yes, ma'am?
There were two investigations, one by the Army and one by the FBI, or were they weren't conducted together?
I'm sure they were working together, but they're separate investigations. The Army investigation, from the Department of Defense perspective, is called the 15-6 investigation. That report has been posted this morning on my daughter's website. Aaron can give you the address, URL for it, but that redacted report is available, and I would encourage each of you to take a look at it.
And one other question, I'm sorry. Based on the information that you all have, do you have any ideas why the shooting took place?
That's a very good question. In my view, there's three potential explanations. The guy went wacko, somebody put drugs, just went wacko that day. That's a possibility. The guy was radicalized, or had gone to the dark side, or was a secret agent for ISIS or somebody like that. And the third explanation is he was doing what he was told to do by people who had authority to tell him to do it. Now, I don't mean to be a tinfoil hat guy, but there's no evidence whatsoever that this guy went wacko. We're told that there's no evidence whatsoever that he went over to the dark side and was radicalized or a member of ISIS or some terrorist organization. And I accept that as probably true, which by inference suggests the only remaining possibility is somebody ordered him to do it, and he did what he was told to do. He comes from the tribe that is the most loyal to the King of Jordan, and I know nothing about, or very little about, Arab politics, but that's the only remaining explanation. Yes, ma'am?
It's unusual for the families of fallen soldiers, and particularly special operators, to come out in public and call for action like this. What motivated you guys to get together and start this?
For me, it's simple. I want my son's name cleared of any wrongdoing, and two, my concern is for justice for the shooter, and that's my only intentions. Is I feel that there's murder, and that he should be charged that's up to the Jordanians, that's not up to us.
I think that when you take into consideration the information we were given at the briefing last week in our conversations, the DOD and the FBI were very thorough in their explanation of what happened, but what they couldn't tell us was why. And because of the string of false narratives that have been advanced by the Jordanians, including a letter here, just another one that we just saw this morning for the first time, it's just more lies. There are several disturbing things about the event. The fact that there's only one gate operational in and out of this base at the current time and has been for a while. These guys work the same shift all the time. Our guys left while they were on shift and they came back. Their shift was to end at 12:05. Their relief was nowhere in sight. The guard who did the shooting was supposed to be some 30, 40 yards back at another location. His plausible explanation for why he was up at the gate was he had to change his battery. Another one of the guards had to go to the restroom while he was there. And all of those coincidences left him in the guardhouse alone when these vehicles approached the gate. Those were all disturbing, and the fact that this supposed noise was a loud noise. The other soldiers were told by the FBI that they interviewed indicated that, well, they heard a loud noise. They wouldn't say a gunshot, though it could have been a gunshot. But the amount of time between the first vehicle passing the gate and the time that Kevin and Matt were shot is about 5 seconds. The soldier purportedly is not carrying a loaded weapon. We were told that their weapons weren't loaded. He had a magazine on his side. He had to unshoulder his weapon, load the magazine, chamber a bullet, and take aim at a moving vehicle. And it's so implausible. And the fact that there was no reaction on the video by the gate guard that was at the lift gate, none. He didn't flinch, he didn't look in any direction or jump or anything. There was no reaction. All of it, the only time he reacted was when the guy opened up on Kevin and Matt. It's very disturbing that the Jordanians continue to advance these false narratives about what happened.
My opinion, and the dads can correct me if I'm wrong, the facts are obvious on the video and the FBI investigation, the Army investigation as to what happened. The blame is not with the 3 Green Berets. The blame is somewhere else on the shooter, and I think that's where this is. We want to know why this happened and the motives of the shooter, and that will come, I think, from the Jordanian government.
I want to answer your question. The very first thing I said to the Army was, I want to know who killed my son, and I want to know why. I understand the fog of war. I've been a Marine for 50 years, and I understand confusion when there's combat. But I knew as soon as I heard the story that there were mistakes made at the gate, that was a complete lie. These Special Forces soldiers are the finest trained, finest led, finest experienced soldiers that existed on this planet. They are magnificent soldiers. They are well trained, they are well led. I thought my twin brother was a stud for being a Marine Phantom pilot and an 01 Charlie pilot in Vietnam. I thought I was a stud because I was a helicopter door gunner. My son went through 2.5 years to become what he was as a Green Beret. And every single Green Beret I've seen is just extraordinary. So for those lying people to claim that our boys made a mistake at the gate, I knew as soon as I heard that that was a complete falsehood. And all I've heard since then is additional falsehoods on additional falsehoods. And I don't understand that. But nobody's going to badmouth my son. Nobody's gonna badmouth their sons. It's not going to be allowed to happen.
Thank you. The group, as they can, will stay by for anybody that wants any additional comments on one-on-one, and thank you for coming very much.
See this later.
They're on the, the latest letter.
Appreciate you.
And also includes the tax survey statements. So
I just got an email from
You look like you could go to court.
Right here,
Yeah, I
one.
mean,
And then right here, gentlemen.
there were some
Right here, guys.
inaccuracies in terms of where Kevin was born and stuff like that.
Come on over here, please.
Thank you. Somebody had Kevin being born to some Arizona vet saying your story.
Yeah.
He was actually born
It is for me. Thank you. Thank you very much.
I